Welcome to The Drill, Western Standard's periodic show covering timely topics. This episode, we're featuring Angelo Isidorou, Executive Director of the UBC Free Speech Club. Angelo, how are you today?
I'm doing well. You?
Doing good, actually. I'm filming here from Victoria. Of course, you're in Vancouver, and we just recently had a massive dump of snow here on the West Coast, which we're not used to.
No.
But somehow we both survived.
Yeah, and now we're here.
Right on. And we had a bunch of power issues on Wednesday when we went to record. So instead of filming this on January 15th when the news broke, we're filming it on January 17th. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I know you must be really busy with this whole Andy Ngo situation. And for those of you who haven't paid attention to this topic, Andy Ngo is a journalist out of Portland, famous for a number of reasons, probably most famous for showing up on the Joe Rogan show after having a milkshake to the face and a concussion as a result. After, I guess, a confrontation with Antifa, which is sort of his beat. He's kind of the journalist there that's talking about what's going on with Antifa locally. And obviously, UBC Free Speech Club decided, hey, here's a great speaker to come in, part of an upcoming series, which I guess you can let us know about. And abruptly, UBC told you no, they're not going to allow him to come. So why don't we dive in at any part there that you think is a good place to start? But maybe you can start with the latest, and we'll work our way backwards. So where are we at today?
Well, the latest right now is we're living the dream, and we're suing UBC, which is not something we wanted to do, but basically we had no other choice. We've been doing events. We've been hosting events for the better part of 3 years now, and we've hosted everybody from Jordan Peterson to Ben Shapiro and ContraPoints and a few others. And we booked Andy, or rather the campus president, Noah booked Andy as part of a lecture series that we want to start in 2020 on radicalism. We want to do a lecture series that examines radicalism both on the left and the right.
Right.
So Andy would be analyzing radicalism on the left, and the topic of his talk was understanding Antifa violence. And in the ultimate form of irony, the school caves in and cancels due to their own fear of Antifa violence.
Now, was that predicated on a specific threat, or do you know if there was a specific threat?
They didn't tell us any specific threat. What they told us, or rather I should describe how that lovely day went. I woke up to a missed call from the chief risk officer. Said, look, you got to give me a call back. We got to talk about this event. Which I expected to some degree, because every event we do, there are these patterns that we notice where at some point you'll have people making threats, and then I get a call from the school that says, look, we got to bring in a couple guards, or we got to bring in lots of guards. For example, with Ben Shapiro, we spent, thousands of dollars there on security. And over the years, we've probably spent like maybe $40,000 total on campus security. So I'm always ready for that call where they're going to invoice us for security. And I thought that's what that call was. But to my surprise, and to the surprise of the Justice Center, the chief risk officer said, look, this event finally went to the table with the executives, and they've asked me to tell you that they're canceling it. And they're canceling it due to the fact that Antifa has been more prominent on campus as of late. And due to the fact that Andy Ngo was assaulted in the past.
Right.
So there's so much wrong in just that sentence on its own of what he told me. On Andy's part, you're basically discriminating against someone who was involuntarily assaulted. It's not like, they say they do a risk assessment, and typically the risk assessments are based on previous events. So if we bring Ben Shapiro, they'll say, okay, well, Ben was at Berkeley and that had issues, so then we correlate that.
Didn't they burn down the campus basically in Berkeley?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So they saw that, and they said, okay, well, that happened at Berkeley. Ipso facto, it's going to happen at UBC. You have to hire 100 guards. And of course, nothing happened with Ben. Mm-hmm. And I think you were at that show, right?
I actually, my nephew really, really wanted to go see it. And so I figured, why not? And 4 of us actually went. And he was really disappointed at the stunning lack of protests
I know.
that occurred. But it was on Halloween. So
Yeah.
I imagine, if you're going to get dressed up, as Antifa likes to do, you probably have, some Halloween costume.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
fair
Well,
enough.
I mean, maybe on Halloween they dress as normal people.
I'm not sure.
Maybe they twist it around. But yeah, I mean, there are no problems at all. So, I'm on the phone with this guy and I say, look, like, why, if this is a safety concern due to his history of events, which he's never done events before. So they said, well, due to the fact that he was assaulted.
On the street, though. I mean, he was on the street doing the man on the street thing with his camera, getting right up in people's faces, I assume, as much as he within his, I guess, his zone of safety. And I don't know, I get the sense that he doesn't put his personal safety necessarily ahead of his journalism, which, or certainly that's the way it appears from what little I know of the gentleman. But yeah, it's definitely, you definitely can't compare what happened during a heated exchange on the street with what would certainly happen at the UBC campus.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I don't think you should be correlating it in any way to say that, look, this guy walked down the street and got attacked by someone, so ipso facto, we don't want to allow him on campus because he was assaulted. I mean, you're basically discriminating against someone for something they have no control over.
It's quite a terrible precedent.
Oh, it's a horrible precedent. And it's hypocritical because, like UBC tweets out this video about how they care about big, important challenges and diversity. And I'm like, really? You're not going to platform a gay Vietnamese journalist because he was assaulted for his beliefs? I mean, this is some pretty not crazy stuff. So, I told the guy, the chief risk officer, I said, look, why can't we hire security if this is a problem? I knew it was going to be a bit of a problem because Antifa hates him because, unfortunate for them, he sort of exposed them and validated a lot of the concerns that people have. So, if there's going to be protests, let's, I'll pay a fee and we'll bring security like we always do, like we've always done for the past 3 years. And to that, I was told, that worked in the past for you guys, but there have been other events with other groups on campus that have been violent. For example, Jen Smith hosted an event on campus that had hundreds of protesters, and it got pretty nasty.
And that's the trans rights,
a
trans person. That's the one where it's a trans female. She's a trans female, and but she's kind of speaks out against the trans movement.
So Jen Smith is a transgender female who goes by he, him pronouns. And he advocates against SOGI, which is a program.
Oh, the provincial education program.
Exactly, which teaches sort of transgender stuff to kids.
Right.
And he's been doing sort of a lecture series all over the province, and it garners a lot of controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite a large protest for him on UBC. There were hundreds of protesters, and someone got assaulted, and there were arrests. And I think the school was somewhat taken aback by that, especially given that, again, the guy told me on the phone, we did Ben Shapiro, there was no problems there. We did Jordan Peterson, we did, all your events. There's never really been any serious issues. But after Ben Shapiro, you have these new Antifa groups that sprung up on campus that felt somewhat ashamed of themselves that they didn't do enough to shut down Ben Shapiro. So things aren't getting better. They're getting worse in terms of the violence on campus, which is unfortunate. And, he said, look, it's security isn't even an option. And that's where the problem legally sort of stood out to me, because in my head, I'm saying, okay, if this is a security threat, let's hire security. Let's work with police. If these people are violent, arrest them. And Bob's your uncle, the problem solved. But I don't know if we'll ever know if they canceled it specifically or truly for security reasons, or is it because of publicity? Because after that Jen Smith event, UBC was kicked out very publicly of the Pride Parade, along with the library.
Right.
And that turned into a big publicity thing because the Pride Society said, the library and UBC platforms hateful people, so they shouldn't be allowed in the Pride Parade.
So, I've got a few years on you. It's hard for me to keep up with the latest in intersectional ideology. What specifically is it about Andy Ngo that riles Antifa? Is he? Obviously, he's not some kind of white nationalist. If he's a Vietnamese immigrant, he's not probably
No, they'll
anti-gay.
believe
If
that
he's
he's a white
gay,
nationalist.
okay.
They'll say that he's a white nationalist. He's a Nazi. He's alt-right. He's a fascist.
Okay, so you can still get those labels even if you're even if it sort of doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface.
Yeah, because they'll see it as, oh, you're just the token for them. They're just controlling you. And
I see.
You're trying to. Their gripe with him is that, well, I saw some of them complain that, oh, Andy Ngo gave kill lists to the Atom Waffen. And then I had to look up what Atom Waffen meant. And it turns out the Atom Waffen is sort of a paramilitary neo-Nazi group in the States.
Oh.
And they were alleging that he gave them kill lists of Antifa. And then, of course, 3 minutes of Googling showed that that isn't the case at all. And all he did was publish an article which happened to have names on it. And then a year later, the Atom Waffen read that article, took the names from that, and added it to their database.
Right.
So with Andy in particular, we were sort of shocked because they really pulled the trigger on the wrong event, UBC, I mean, because the guy is not that controversial. We've hosted more controversial people with no issues.
What about doxing? I know Andy Ngo. I've seen it. I've seen some of his posts where he actually names protesters, publishes their faces, which of course Antifa typically covers up so as not to have that. Do they perceive that as a form of doxing?
They perceive that as doxing,
right?
And
interestingly, just to be fair, I was watching a video posted by Unifor last week, completely unrelated, but related to the co-op refinery strike, where they in this video they named and showed faces of a number of replacement workers, or what they would call scabs, sort of taken aback, going, well, this is essentially doxing. Like, they're not saying to go and be violent towards these people or to, otherwise go after these people, but is that an implication? And maybe there's a parallel here, right? Is that maybe why they don't like Andy Ngo? Because historically he's named and shown faces of some of the key people that are organizing this in Portland.
I think a vigilante element could definitely be part of it. I mean, I believe he started naming people after he was assaulted. He was trying to figure out who assaulted him. And he kind of went on a bit of a crusade to expose these people, right. Which is understandable. And then you kind of play a game of who started it, because certainly both sides do it. But I think in terms of what he's currently doing, where, you might see on his wall that he's publishing different mugshots. I mean, the way he's described it, and I would tend to agree that doxing would have to involve some kind of information that isn't necessarily public.
Right.
So if somebody, is publicly exposed, for example, just recently, there was an Antifa leader or an Antifa blogger that was accidentally exposed. His identity was accidentally exposed by CBC in a documentary they just produced on Antifa. Oh. And they did a really terrible job of blurring his face, because he has been sort of an Antifa blogger for about 10 years. And then, next thing you know, Rebel Media is reporting on it. Everybody knows about it. Andy reports his identity, and he's a high school teacher in Alberta.
Oh, okay.
So, and then now that's become, a thing that spreads like wildfire.
Right.
So, I'm not in love with the whole, who's he sort of thing, especially because, I've been doxxed before.
Okay.
And I think, your instinct is, fine, I'll do it right back to you.
Right.
And it creates an environment that really sucks to live in and to work in, because then you're always worried about, you're always looking behind your back, and it's worse when, there's defamatory statements. And I think that's something he also focuses on, which is, look, people are lying about me, and I want to find out who's lying about me so I can take legal action.
Right.
So I can understand where he's coming from. Nonetheless, even if as a journalist he's targeting individuals which are violent and they've publicized themselves, he still has the right as an individual to be platformed.
Right.
He hasn't done anything illegal.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's an interesting tangent for sure around the doxing and the Antifa stuff that goes down in Portland. But ultimately, your student club decided to bring a speaker in to speak on campus. There shouldn't really be a whole lot more to be said about that, right? Yeah. You're a university, you're bringing in a speaker. It's not the first and certainly won't be the last speaker with any level of controversy. Doesn't mean everybody that shows up to see them agrees with everything they say. Certainly when I saw the Ben Shapiro one, I disagree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of things. But, I want to hear an intelligent, articulate point of view that maybe is different than mine and maybe will challenge mine, which is kind of the point of universities, is it not? To create marketplace of ideas where you can hear and discuss and criticize ideas that maybe run afoul of your own. If we just deplatform everybody, then ultimately do we not just create a society where we live in a bubble, and what's the value of having a university in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, this is the perceptional issue. I mean, Andy himself in a recent interview said, look, you don't have to like me, but this isn't really about me. This is what we're trying to say as well, is that this is about the precedent. Yeah. And once you explain the precedent to people, they're like, oh, this could happen to anybody. Mm-hmm. If we're going off of the heckler's veto, which is, you could bring Mother Teresa to UBC.
Well, and she's controversial already. So
yeah, well, who's not controversial? I was going to say J.K. Rowling the other day. But
anybody historically or alive or dead is has baggage. I remember getting into a meaningless debate online about Martin Luther King Jr. and this person, and it's like, look, Martin Luther King Jr. was not perfect either, but man, he had some incredibly great things to say. And if we can't move past that and recognize the good of the contribution of a man like Martin Luther King Jr., then what are we even doing? Right.
Yeah. But I mean, that goes back to what you explained and what you thought universities are for. And I don't think that's the case anymore, at least not what I've experienced. The other side sees what you're talking about, the diversity of thought, going to an event that you don't necessarily agree with the speaker. I mean, they see that as performative. They see it as you're validating their opinion because you're giving them a platform. Their perception of what you're doing, of what the audience is doing in engaging in, the agora, the marketplace of ideas, they see that very differently from how we see that. So I think it's a tribal issue in terms of the interpretation of the events. They see these events as a rally. We're bringing Andy Ngo to validate all of the evil ideas that the Free Speech Club believes in because they just want to do a circle jerk echo chamber thing, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, and if you were at the Ben Shapiro event, you saw that in every Q&A, we always say, if you would disagree with the speaker, you can jump the line. Mm-hmm. And I
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that creates
and we saw it. Well, and interestingly, we saw a controversial speaker. I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but where there was a stunning degree of empathy on behalf of, I would say, your group and certainly the speaker as well, in protecting the identity of that individual after the fact. And I don't know the story. Obviously, you'd be more aware of what went down after, but delayed getting the video online and lots of things like that, which I think was fantastic. There should be some free debate, and it's nice. I've said some really stupid things in my life that were not recorded. And, and we live in this social media age, and you've grown, I guess it's one sense grown up with it. Right. And, it's hard to take things back now. Right. Yeah. And so we got to stop, this whole idea of just, crushing people out of existence because they said one wrong thing or one thing that could be perceived to be wrong one time in their life on audio or video recording. You know what I mean? You know, like we used to be allowed to make mistakes, and you know, Barack Obama, you know, has opinions that evolve. Right? Can we not all just have our opinions evolve over time? You know, do we have to be perfect at every moment?
I think so, but I think the issue is that I'm convinced our side believes in what you're talking about. I'm worried that the other side is very utopian. So they don't believe in sort of an evolution of thought. They believe in dogma, right? Yeah. And that's where the difference is. And of course, what you're talking about in terms of that Ben Shapiro event was sort of an altercation or a heated discussion, probably honestly one of the most heated discussions I've seen Ben have between him and a ticket holder who jumped the line to challenge him. And it got so heated that after the show, you know, I had a discussion with Ben, and he said, look, I don't want it in the video because it's too much.
Yeah.
What happened in there is for that audience to take and digest. And he actually met up and had brunch with that individual the next day. And, and of course, what happened was I got attacked by our own people because when I uploaded it, everyone was like, oh, where's that big altercation that's going to become a clickbait video and this and that, right? And then I had to say, oh, Ben told me to delete it. And then everyone was like, oh, well, Ben would never say that, right? Because they know him so well. So the internet's a funny place when it comes to dealing with the mob. And the mob exists on both sides, you know? In this case with Andy, the mob just happens to be on the left. And we get accused all the time of, oh, we, you know, the Free Speech Club only brings right-wingers. We've brought just as many left-wingers as we have right-wingers. It's just that when we bring right-wingers, it's calamity. It's national news. It becomes a big thing. There's, you know, people wailing in the street. When we bring a left-winger, it's just quiet because that's the zeitgeist, right?
It makes me wonder when the left, and I hate to sort of paint a broad stroke, but, you know, I'm old enough to remember when the left was a movement that was built upon free speech. You know, you think of the Martin Luther King Juniors of the world and everybody that came after, and they would argue for free speech. And of course they had to because they didn't have it. And they eventually got it. And that's how society in so many ways has benefited through this, through progress, as a result of people like that, pioneers of free speech. And at some point in the last 20 years, the dial shifted, and suddenly, you know, within the progressive movement, we have this idea that we could censor and bully ourselves towards progress instead of you know, making rational arguments and talking about issues. And you know, I don't know when that happened. I honestly just blinked and everything changed.
Yeah, I think it's heavily due to subjectivity. I think one of the issues that I've noticed is that their interpretation of words has changed. So their interpretation of words is violence. They see it as if someone is wailing a club around, attacking people.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder that their reaction is so extreme, because their understanding of what speech is so dogmatic and ideologically perverted.
But that's new. That's new. That, you know, honestly, that didn't exist. Sure. Yeah, that didn't exist 30 years ago. I really think that there's something more fundamental to it, and I think it comes back to that issue of tribalism, right? Where, you know, if our side is winning, then you know, we don't need free speech.
Yeah,
because the free speech will just challenge our side. Right. Yeah, and certainly you could make an argument in the 1950s, you know, sort of predating the civil rights movement, that was probably a pretty prevalent attitude on, you know, what we might have called the right at that period in time. And certainly that, you know, there was a challenge to that. And I think it would be hard to argue that that wasn't a good thing ultimately for society. I don't know anybody who would argue otherwise. But why is it now that it's not a good thing to challenge the status quo? And I think it's because the left, if you will, you know, again, broad strokes, hate to sort of do that, but I think if they're winning, if their side is winning, then they have no reason to, to be in favor of free speech, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, by winning, you mean, what is more established in the zeitgeist of the culture? What is the norm? And of course, in the 60s, you had, back in the day, the prudish Republican sort of social conservative, we don't like anything that's different thing. And they were the establishment. And the left was for free speech. And now it seems to be going the other way. It's interesting. One of our top members, one of our most active members, is actually a hippie in his 70s. And he actually popularized Rec Beach back in the day. If you don't know, Rec Beach is a speech.
I've heard the legend.
Yeah. So it's
You're gonna have
what
to Google
you would expect a hippie to look like: long hair, long beard, wacky, interesting guy. And I'm saying, he's in the Green Party. He's an environmentalist. He's a leftist. Yeah. I'm saying, well, how is it that everyone around you everyone that you are associated with is so anti-free speech, and you're so absurdly pro-free speech? And he said something interesting. He said, I didn't change. Everyone changed around me. I just stayed where I was.
Right.
And I think that's what it is. I think the pendulum and the Overton window shifted and attitudes changed. And, it's happened very quick. You have other people like Peter Boghossian, who's been talking about this cancellation. You have Jonathan Kay. You have Brett Weinstein. You have people who are on the left. But of course, any leftists, and again, we're being so broad here, but any leftists who are pro-free speech are immediately disregarded by the ardent leftists as being basically conservative.
Or apologists for the alt-right or something, right?
Of course, right?
Yeah.
So
what a crazy time to be alive. It's funny because, and I don't know how old you are, but you're obviously a lot younger than I am. But it must sound weird to you that, like, how profoundly different the world is 30 years. And we reached a time, I felt like we were really reaching a time in the 90s when we were beginning to really see equality. I remember, within the conservative movement, people like myself were really actively involved in equal rights for gay people, and a number of things that were very cutting edge for the time. And now you look at it and you're like, I don't know anybody on the right that is super opposed to gay marriage or super opposed to gay people being allowed to be who they are. And I don't know anybody on the right who a lot of these social issues, look, people still have trouble with a lot of issues, right? But ultimately, we have, as a country, never been more progressive in human history, and yet, you hear these voices on this fringe left that keep talking about how essentially we're fascist and we've never been more right wing than any time in history, and it's absurd. It's for me, for a person my age, pushing 50, it's just absurd to listen to that, because it's so not true. Yeah. It's amazing how much society has changed in the last 30 years, and certainly for the 20 years leading up to about mid 2000, just an amazingly positive change. And then we got into this toxic, prescriptive, intersectional, us versus them, like this whole notion of can we elevate girls in education without pushing boys down? Can we do two things at once, right? Like, and the answer apparently is no, we can't. In order for us to elevate one group, we have to bring down another group, right? And it's sort of absurd notions like this that just completely baffle somebody of my age who, we were on the bleeding edge of this stuff, and now I just look at it and I don't even recognize it.
Yeah. Everything is a binary. Everything's black and white. Everything is segregated, and that's the thing. It's like there's no room in the political conversation for people who are like, yeah, I mean, could be right, could be wrong. I like this about this person, but I don't like that. We booked Andy Ngo. I don't agree with everything Andy Ngo says or does.
I don't
But
even
the fact
know.
of the matter is, there's demand for it. People wanted to see it. We thought it'd be interesting.
Sure.
And I think what the fringe left is, and again, we're both being careful not to do broad strokes, but I think what they're trying to do is determine what is and isn't tolerated in society. Even though they're a vocal minority, they're attempting to create a culture that says anything that's not what their beliefs are is fascist, evil, get it away from us. And because at the end of the day, Andy's like center right. He describes himself as center right. It's not like, but again, that's you and me saying, it's not that controversial. That's our perception. But to them, we're both, in the thick of it. So the issue is that they're trying to define the culture, and they think you can define the culture starting on campus. And that's why their reaction to this is, look, if you host this event, we're going to come and shut it down physically. There are tweets all over the place about it, about curb stomping and pulling fire alarms and milkshakes and all that stuff. They see it as, this is how we win. And of course, the reaction to that is not to do the same. We've seen an issue on the right now where you have groups springing up that are saying, look, let's just cover our faces and do the same thing. That's, to me, that's a race to the bottom. And I don't want to get there. So, as much as I blame Antifa for this cancellation, to me, like, Antifa is just a symptom. They're going to do what they're always going to do. At the end of the day, the institution that promotes Enlightenment values needs to take a stand, and they didn't, and they caved in. And their idea of caving in, or their goal of caving in, they told me this. They said, look, we believe that if we cancel these controversial events, Antifa will leave the campus, and then maybe down the road you can bring Andy back after things simmer down. And that's, to me, I told them straight up, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
That's absurd.
Because
the winners don't usually leave.
Yeah, and typically if you negotiate with terrorists and say, here's $1 million, they're not going to say, okay, bye, you're never going to see us again. That's not, that's you're caving in to domestic terrorism, basically. So they're not going anywhere. And in fact, you've emboldened them and given them the illusion of power, which they'll no doubt use and abuse. So I told them, what you're doing is actually making UBC less safe. You're creating problems down the road because we're not going anywhere. So I said, look, I'm basically going to sue you guys and take it to the Supreme Court. And that's the plan.
Well, on that note, and thank you for exploring those fascinating tangents with me up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously, being a student club, you guys are just awash with money to take UBC to court. Or is that not the case? Do you have a partner in this?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're an organization. We try. We've definitely hosted some pretty large events. This wasn't our largest event, so the money situation isn't that crazy.
Right.
But in this case, the support that we needed, and I think we got, was, a proper uproar. And I think we definitely got that. Even the media itself has been quite positive, I would say.
Right.
Maybe because Andy's a journalist.
Sure.
Maybe they sort of got spooked and said, okay, like this could create a problem for us. So we got the attention, and our goal was to get UBC to rescind the cancellation, which they didn't do. So now it's going to the Supreme Court. In terms of...
sorry, just to clarify, that's the Supreme Court of British Columbia, right?
Of British Columbia, that's correct.
Okay.
In terms of the next steps, I don't think we can necessarily host anything at the moment, just because we rely on public institutions to operate as venues. And I frankly don't trust UBC to do that, nor do I trust SFU, which has been a bad actor in the past as well. So I think, this case, at least if I'm thinking of it correctly as the Justice Center has described it to me, could be quite historical.
Well, that's, yeah. And sorry to interrupt. I think that this is kind of the point, right? Is in some ways, I sort of hope UBC doesn't rescind on their decision, so you can beat them in court and set a very clear, firm precedent that institutions of higher learning cannot discriminate, in this fashion. And I guess from my perspective as a total outsider, that's what I would like to see. I would like to see the principles of free speech affirmed here. And obviously, if UBC were to rescind at this point, there's no case law that can be referred back to.
It would be embarrassing for them for sure, and it would be a bit of a black eye. But I'm sort of on the same boat as you now, which is, look, let's take it to the Supreme Court of BC. We think we'll win because this is so beyond the pale of what is proper. And if that happens, we create a legal precedent. I don't care what hypothetical buzzwords the fringe left wants to create about things. A legal precedent is a legal precedent, which one day could extend to all of Canada. This is how these things start. And if we create a legal precedent that says, look, you can't just give in to the heckler's veto, because then you can book anybody, any speaker at any time, and anyone could say, I'm going to burn the place down. And then you don't have a society at that point.
Right. Well, and I think the flip side is also true, and obviously we're speculating a little bit here. I think if the court does what it should do, then they should, do a serious finger wagging at UBC in this situation. But even if you lost this court case, I think it's important because it would have a different effect. Obviously, there'd be a different precedent, but it would, I think, galvanize Canadians who think that we live in a free country to come to a realization that maybe that's actually not the case. So half of me hopes that the court will come down, in favor of you, to affirm the fact that we have a free country. But, I feel like if the opposite happens, it'll wake a lot of people up who think, look, I don't go to university. It's been a long time since I've been there, right? And but I have a kid that's going to go to university in a few years, right? And I think there's a lot of people like me who don't realize that we've kind of gotten to the place where we are in our culture, and it's pretty shocking when you really break down what exactly they're saying. And you sort of half wonder, these are intelligent people. The UBC executive is made up of a lot of smart folks. They have to realize this sort of awful precedent that they're setting in this situation, don't they?
I don't know. I mean, you can speculate. I speculated to the point where maybe they want to get sued, so then Antifa doesn't point the finger at them; it points the finger at a Supreme Court, right? A Supreme Court case, right? It's washing their hands clean, maybe. But I think you're right, and I think, look, at the end of the day, you're a busy working man. People are busy living their lives, working, going home. Not everybody's a junkie like us that has time to, delve into this stuff. Right. But then people deserve to know. Like, it takes a while to really understand this stuff. And I think what's important, and I think what we're doing right, is really condensing it down to simple principles that the working layman could understand and say, yeah, I think that's important. Right? Because we're all busy with our lives, but at the end of the day, people have kids, and your kids are going to be going to this place, and you want your kids to get an education in critical thinking, not an education in postmodern neo-Marxist feminist dancing therapy, right? So, and it's a lot of money too. That's the other part of this is a tax issue where, look, we're all paying our tax dollars to go into this institution, and we are all very politically diverse with different ideas, and we all have a gentleman's agreement as a society that we're going to be neutral in these institutions. Libraries are neutral, and universities are neutral, and if they're politically biased, then that sort of alienates the taxpayer. So
there's something even more fundamental, because that speaker you were mentioning earlier, Jen Smith, came to Victoria and booked at a library. I think 30 people showed up to listen to him, and a whole bunch more showed up to protest, and lots of people I know frankly, on both sides. Some went to see him, and some went to protest him. And I think protesting is legitimate. If you want to protest, 100%, right? That's part of a free country.
Yeah, that's your right.
Deplatforming is not. Pulling fire alarms and assaulting people and the like. That's not part of a free country. And there used to be, I think, a consensus in our culture, that there was some clear lines that you just didn't cross, and we've crossed those, and we seem to be crossing them over and over again. Like there's no barriers to this, and to me, I think that's the most stunning change culturally. But there, the fundamental part, we talked about the marketplace of ideas and everything else, but there's something even more fundamental to free speech, and it goes like this. It's if somebody has a very bad idea, right? Like we can all agree that fascism is a very bad idea, right? And so if somebody who was legitimately a fascist wanted to go and talk about how great fascism was, right? I think we would all find that pretty repugnant. But even then, I don't think as a society we say, no, you can't talk about those things. Because part of what free speech allows you to do is it allows you to air bad ideas so that they can see the light of day, and people can see how, in the example of fascism, just how terrible they are, right? Yeah. Because if all we do is block bad ideas and the people that promote them, then they're just going to grow in the shadows, and we're not going to have that regular, ongoing assessment of ideas that we need to have if we're going to progress as a society. And I really feel like that concept for a lot, and it's a hard concept, right? Because there's a lot of ideas that I find truly deeply repugnant, and I really just to even hear them is disgusting, right? But that's, I think, the kind of compromise you have to make to have a free society and to progress as a society, is you have to be open and willing to have those ideas aired. And libraries and educational institutions are the place for those to happen. Yeah. If we pretend away fascism like it didn't actually exist, because there's no speakers out there that want to talk about it, and we're kind of in that place anyway. I don't think there's not a lot of real fascists around, and when they do, they kind of hover in their mom's basements or whatever, right? But the problem is, some point in society, people are going to go, well, what is this thing called fascism? Maybe we should check it out. Maybe there's some good qualities there. Yeah. No,
well, naive people will. I mean, that's the thing. Naive people will, and I think
that's right.
You censor it, you make it sexy, you make it, it's the Streisand effect. It backfires.
Yeah.
You censor it, it becomes, we're human beings. This is the oldest story ever. Don't eat that apple. Anything you do, don't eat that apple, and we eat the apple right away.
Well, and I could present my own counter argument. When you look at ISIS, for example, right, and all the recruiting that they did online, if they were not recruiting online, they never would have recruited all the people they recruited, right? And so, so how do we, as a society, we can't be talking about, just blocking every bad idea we don't like, but maybe we need to be thinking in a more holistic way.
Well, how do you account for it, right? I think their side is saying, well, if you platform someone who has repugnant ideas, they're going to persuade naive people in the audience to become violent and join their radical belief system. And furthermore, you are normalizing those ideas by giving them a platform.
Right.
That is their interpretation. They see it as hate speech, which is completely subjective in this day for some reason. Even though legally, is someone inciting a genocide? Is someone saying, let's go attack Group X and get rid of them? If so, we're not going to platform them, and they should be prosecuted because that's illegal.
Yeah.
But if someone is saying something incredibly stupid or incredibly repugnant, the question is, well, how do you allow them to say that, but ensure that the pedestal you give them will not only be a gift to them, but also a curse, because that spotlight means that they are open to really harsh criticism.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why with these events, we always have the Q&A, because it's like, I don't want it to be an echo chamber, because if it's an echo chamber, you might have naive people who might accept the ideas too easily.
Mm-hmm.
If you have some guy Sieg heiling on stage, which, I don't know when that would happen, and you go and present ideas contrary to him and you prove him wrong, and you do it in an articulate, sophisticated way instead of putting a mask on and throwing Molotov cocktails.
Right.
That is how you get rid of that. And you broadcast that, you film that, and you say, look, this is how you deconstruct ideas. This is something that isn't new. That Thomas Aquinas taught his classes, forever ago, 1,000 years ago, in that fashion. He would start his lecture by saying, God doesn't exist, prove otherwise. and he would sit there. There's this notion that the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. If you look at actually Thomas Aquinas, I mean, he would debate with his students on the very existence of God, build an argument, have a respondio, and that's just part of critical thinking. That's what universities are for. You're developing your brain and your ability to argue. So, with Andy, my hope was, look, if you want to protest peacefully. That's your right. We celebrate your right. If you want to challenge him, come in and challenge him.
Mm-hmm.
I want that there. I want that audience to experience that. Otherwise, frankly, it's boring.
Right.
But the moment you attack him and shut everything down, I mean, I've had speakers in the past, and I won't say who, but there are definitely speakers who almost want to get deplatformed.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they do, it completely validates their objective.
Right. Yeah.
It gives them a huge boost.
It's so obvious too, right?
Oh, this is like basic, human behavior. And
it's like people who you can tell are trying to get banned on Twitter.
Yeah.
Why? Well, it's because then they can have the badge that they were banned on Twitter. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's trolls everywhere, and there's people who feed off of it. I think in this case, I was pretty upset when it was canceled, and I pretty much knew right off the bat it wasn't going to get rescinded. But the silver lining is this, and this is what the lawyers said. They said, look, this is going to go to a judicial review, and if we win, it'll create a legal precedent that means that you can bring Andy Ngo and just about anybody else and do an event that's 10 times bigger afterwards. Yeah. So maybe this needs to happen at this point in time, right? And if we lose, then that'll be so, I think that'll be big enough to wake even the layman up to say, okay, wait a minute, this is actually a big problem, and we need to do something.
Well, and that's why when I heard the news, I was sort of processing all of this, and I thought, this is a win either way. The last thing you want right now is for UBC to rescind their decision, because either way, either we reaffirm free speech in our society in a serious legal way, or the clarion call goes out to people to let them know, hey, by the way, Canada doesn't have free speech, and just so you're aware, this is the kind of culture we live in now.
Yeah, so it's a litmus test. It's a total litmus test, and if we win, then that's great, and it'll be something to be celebrated. If we lose, it'll prove our point about the battle of free speech, and I'll move to the desert and sort of be an Obi-Wan Kenobi hermit and let the next generation fight that battle if we lose. But I'm pretty optimistic we're going to win, just because this is, at least according to the lawyers, this is like way beyond the pale. Usually legal issues that you'll see is schools purposefully inflating security prices. This is what's been happening all over the place. And actually the JCCF just won a case in Alberta where a pro-life group was charged something like $20,000 just to host an event for security. And that was, 2016. In Alberta. So now that created, a legal precedent, which could hopefully be expanded elsewhere. But this is what it takes. It's going to be a legal battle. And at the end of the day, if we don't do it, who will? You know, I'm missing the part of my brain that that is fearful of stuff. So, you know, at some point you're like, look, what are you going to take from me? You know what I mean? Like, we booked this. If I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I just walked away quietly.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of people would be upset, and I'd be upset, and Andy would be upset, and I would be very upset for the next generation that won't be able to experience freedom.
Right.
So we'll see what comes of it. If all goes well, then we'll continue, you know, doing our events as we do and having a conversation in Canada and having a diversity of speakers. It's just part of it. We don't have First Amendment. It's true, but we have some rights, and I want to test whether those are really there or not. And I think this case, which again could end up being quite historical, might be the ultimate litmus test.
So, Angelo, I was joking earlier about the financial situation. If people do want to help, how do they get a hold of you? Should they reach out on your Facebook page?
Yeah, we have the Free Speech Club on Facebook. We have our YouTube channel, the Free Speech Club is what it's called. And if you go there, there's links to support both us and the Justice Center. And we upload videos there regularly that cover these sorts of issues. So yeah, I think we have about 35,000 subs now. And then of course, www.freespeechclub.com. And yeah, and I think we're on Twitter as well, at the
Awesome.
FS Club.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule. Wishing you the very best. And for those of you who are tuned in on YouTube, you can also hear this podcast on your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening to us on your podcast, you can find us on YouTube at the Western Standard. Don't forget to become a member of the Western Standard for as little as $5 a month. You can support journalism that is government free. So, so thanks again to our guest today, Angelo, and all the very best. And we'll, I'm sure, hear a lot more in the coming days and weeks ahead.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right.